so this presentation is about the proper unit testing of Angularjs applications. This was, so you'll see, but firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Tomas Herich, and I was working with Angular for some time now, also some smaller, some bigger projects, and and I try to sometimes get this know-how which I have and share it. So in this particular one is about this proper testing, and what it will be about is, so there's like a standard way of testing Angularjs applications when you are Googling for it, so how to test my controller, how to test my service. It's like you always find some tutorials which are doing in the same way, and then this brings some problems if you have a bigger projects, and then we will go to like how we can solve this. But firstly, like why I was interested in this topic. So the thing is, I was actually working right now at the customer project for 7 months, and it was like a really big Angularjs portal, and the second part of the project was Node.js services, quite a lot, and we had there quite a lot of tests. So that means like the two projects. So the first project is Angular portal. It was like more than 1,100 tests, and it took like 150 seconds to run them. And in comparison to this second project where we had more than 6,000 tests, and it took like 1/5 of the time. So then of course I was a little bit curious, like how is this possible? And so of course it must be somehow related to the environment where it runs, or the frameworks which are used, or the libraries. So it must have something to do with that. And of course, like as I said, there's two projects. So one was AngularJS portal. There was like the standard stack, that means the task runner. Then we use like Karma test runner for the Jasmine tests, and those tests were then run in Chrome or PhantomJS. But then we was so many tests that we had actually problems with memory when we were running it in PhantomJS. Then we tried to split it, but at the end we just settled for Chrome. And those 6,000 tests and like node logic, that was just standard, like run in Node. So that made Mocha test runner and the Chai assertion library. So but why? Why was it such a huge difference in a runtime of those tests? So as I said, like the standard way of testing Angularjs application is using Karma test runner and Jasmine testing framework, and those tests look somehow like this. Can you see? So how many of you are working with Angular or have worked with Angular, please? So quite a lot. I hope all of you have also written tests, hopefully. So then, of course, you are familiar with such a test. But basically, what you have to do is to instantiate the Angular module, and then you can like mock something, for example, here, or you don't have to, and then you have to get reference to the service or controller you want to test. So it's like the standard way of doing things. And so what's the catch? So the thing is, what is the most important about this test is actually that those first two lines where you did like before each module, my app or whatever, my app, my submodule, that's like the instantiating of the Angularjs application. So it's the same as if you would run it like in a browser, like the user came to the website, it's the same. So what we can say is that Angular context is like initialized Angularjs dependency injection mechanism, and we will go a little bit deeper into that because this is the key to understand. So as you all know, like if you are writing some Angularjs application in like old style, then in every file you have like this, how you start is like Angular.module, and there you create or get already existing module, and then you use this available API, Angular's API, to register your controller, provider, factory, service, directory, whatever. So actually you are hanging your functionality on a AngularJS global object, which is then available in the browser. So and this is actually the way this dependency injection works in Angular. So you register everything in Angular, and then during the runtime, Angular can instantiate all those like services and controllers and factories and whatever based on the annotation. So like it knows what to inject. Like not annotations, I mean like those like array annotation, like strings inside, not the Angular 2 annotations. So yeah, as I said, so this is how it looks like a typical AngularJS file. Of course, you usually split, so you don't have like the controllers and factors and services together. You have it in more files. So like let's say one service per file. But generally speaking, you have Angular global object, and then you register this functionality into it under some name. And why they did it? So of course I never spoke with them, but I suppose it was mostly based on like historical reasons, because at the time they were creating AngularJS, the module ecosystem wasn't that mature yet, so I think they were only like required.js or under starting. That means they chose this way as like least painful way. So also what was popular at the time was like if you had an application, then you register also everything in your global object, so creating a namespace, and then build was mostly like concatenation of the wrap functionality and EPs. So this is where they are coming from. So and how does it look in the test, this Angular context which I was describing? So it's the similar test like in the beginning, and as you can see, like this first thing, you actually need to initialize this Angular application context. Then you may or may not mock something, and then you inject the stuff you want to test from the initialized Angular application. And there is actually no way to get the reference to your factories or controllers without doing this. Like there is no API by default, like you can hack it, but it's not available. And then after you proceed to testing, and that's with the service. So that's the simplest case. But let's say you have like a controller, then it gets a little bit trickier. So again, you have to initialize application context and maybe do some mocking. And then if you want to get the reference to your controller, you have to inject the $controller root scope. That's optional. You can actually do it without the root scope and creating a new scope and all the dependencies. So and then you actually instantiate the controller here. The way it's described in most tutorials is like using root scope, then creating a new scope and using it for this controller during creation, so you can then test it with this scope. But then of course nowadays it's more popular to do it like with controller as syntax. That means it would be enough just to do it with controller without scope, but still you need quite a lot of Angular API just to test your function. And then the worst case scenario with the directives, so it's even worse. So again, you need root scope, and now you really need it, and you need the $compile. Then you need to create element out of the string with directives name, compile it, the digest, then get the reference to some element inside of the directive, and then fire events, and then check what happened. So that's quite crazy actually.
Is it worth it?
No. No, it's not. I mean, it's only worth it when you really want to test like some changes in the DOM, if you have this kind of directive. But nowadays, also in Angular 1.5, it's coming like the component instead of directive, which is like a syntactic sugar for some type of directives, which is like this component pattern, because in the Angular 2.0, everything will be component, so it's already going in that direction. There are also like blog posts about it, how you can do it with directives. And now in 1.5, they're actually bringing like .component API, which is like a syntactic sugar for the directive, which does for you with the defaults. There is a way around this. You can register the directives controller as a controller in Angular, and then use the string name of the controller in the directive, but then this controller is available in the whole application. You don't want that, so it's like a hack. And if you want to test the link function or something, then only this way. And it's crazy. And if you do a little bit profiling in Chrome during running of those tests in Karma test runner, then you see that actually like what takes the most time is this instantiating of the Angular application. Of course, you can argue that you can really do some small modules like in Angular 1.x and really like instantiate this part, but you still need to instantiate it. And I never seen a project where people had discipline like in chunking it in proper modules, because it has almost zero influence on anything else. So there was like usually just one app module for everything and maybe app services, and then it's like a huge chunks, and then it looks like this, and maybe some testing will happen eventually. So the problems, as I already mentioned them, but let's go through them again. So the first and the main problem is that you have to instantiate your AngularJS application just to get reference to the controller service. So there is no way to actually get reference to your functions which you implemented without running AngularJS application. That's like the main point. Secondly, even if you have it, you already done it, it can be quite hard and painful to get the reference to something, for example directives controller, or completely impossible, such as in case link function in directive, you cannot really get reference to that, so you really have to do this crazy directive testing. And of course, to instantiate AngularJS application, what you have to do is include everything what you have been using, because without that it will throw errors. That means, like, let's say ng-animate, Angular UI bootstrap, whatever, like all the Angular mocks, or everything. So it also can be a couple of megabytes in the end if you used quite a lot, and then this needs to be done, and it takes time. And if you want to test quite often, then of course it's heavy. And that this Angular context can grow quite large. Also, as I mentioned, that the discipline is often lacking in projects. So what you actually can do is, like when you do Angular.module, you can really do smaller chunks which are enclosed, just like, let's say, for a feature. But even though it's still something, you still need to instantiate, you still need to include all the third-party libraries. So yeah, I don't think it's just like the solution just to do it small. So what we can do about it? Actually, there is a way. So the thing is, nowadays, like this summer, the new version of JavaScript was released at ECMAScript 2015, or with the older name ECMAScript 6. I prefer the 6, whatever, I may say 6. The thing is, actually, it doesn't have to be those modules. Any modules will do. So that means also, like if you are using like common JS syntax that like with require and module exports and with browserify, it will work. Or even with require JS. It's not the point which modules, you need the modules. And why, you will see soon. And yeah, so this is like an example of this ECMAScript 6 import syntax. So why you need that? Or yeah, let's speak more about the modules. So like implementation in a file is like isolated when it's a module, so it's like self-contained, it doesn't pollute your global namespace. So when you import it, it's only available in this other module. Also, like those imports and exports are explicit, you I suppose saw it already. And yeah, so the thing is, actually, as I told, in AngularJS you already have this dependency injection mechanism where you register everything into global Angular object, and then Angular knows what to give where when it's instantiating those services. But here we can speak about the second dependency injection mechanism, which is not really true, but similar. During the build time, when you have those modules, like the files are the modules, and then because it's not supported natively yet in a browser, then Browserify or Webpack or something else has to go through and wrap everything and concatenate everything and implement like some mock require and imports and whatever for browser. So then you have like two dependency injection mechanisms in one place. And then if you compare it, so Angular works with registering everything in the global object, and then these modules, there's like a transparent div wrapper because it's not yet natively supported, so you have to use Browserify or Webpack, which wraps it. Then Angular has its own custom registration API like factory directive controller, and the modules are standard, so it's part of the language now, so it's not going anywhere. It was also adopted by the TypeScript compiler now, so yeah, it's really huge adoption. Both are concatenation friendly. one is framework specific, second is framework agnostic, and the main thing is like in Angular you saw it's really hard to get reference to what you want to test, but it turns out like with modules it's really easy. So how can we use it to implement unit testing in AngularJS application? So let's say we have a to-do service which stores to-dos, and you can add to-do and you can update to-do and you can toggle to-do, whatever. And the thing is, so we are using now the modules. So we don't have a file where we do like Angular point service and there implement the service. We have it in a separate file, let's say like to-do service.js, and then we can import this file and instantiate the service. This service actually has no dependencies. We will see later what happens when we have dependencies. This service has no dependencies, so we just instantiate it and then we can test it. So like no Angular, because the service has nothing to do with Angular. Some services have nothing to do with Angular. Let's say there's like integration services where you have like the HTTP, but then again you can mock it and you should separate it. But most of your logic is actually Angular-less. Also for the controllers, because nowadays we are using controller S syntax, that means no scope. We should stay away from watchers or broadcasts and so on. So actually, yeah, usually the logic is just logic, and then we actually can really unit test it without starting AngularJS application. So yeah, what we did, we just run the test. There was like no API of Angular involved. So, and how does it look like? So this is like an example of implementation of this service. Also, of course, it's like shortened. So we have like some function which is to-do service. It has for injection initial to-dos, or it can be like, yeah, I didn't have it in the previous slide, but whatever. Then we return public interface, then we implement the functionality. So there's like implementation. Then this is the key. So implementation is in one file, and then we have a second file where we register it into Angular just like before. So let's say we have like this to-do service.js, and then we have to-do module.js, second file, and in this file we require it, and we require like import service, import Angular, and then register it into Angular. But because those two are separated, this enables us to require just the service implementation in test and test it without Angular. Because if we did in one file, then if you try to import this file in a test, then it will complain that I don't have Angular and why. But there is no Angular in the services implementation.
Why are you exporting it at the end?
The module, because that's like a sub-module, and then I have some other module at the root of the application when I register all the sub-modules.
Okay, you will register everything here, all the.
So this is just like, let's say I have a to-do module where it's like to-do functionality, to-do controller, and to-do service. But then I have other modules, and I have one main module where I register all of them. I will show them at the end at the example. So and for testing, now we can actually really test it without browser, without Karma, without Jasmine, without Angular, and then like the default for me, also what we saw in a previous presentation is that with the Mocha, it's really easy to test asynchronously. So it was like the choice number one. Also the API is quite nice and concise. So for me, the combination for Mocha test runner and the Chai assertion framework was the best, mostly because of this async support, which is really like nice to work with. And what if we have dependencies? So of course, like unit testing is about testing the unit, and then also like same with like in Java. So if you have some dependencies, you should mock them. So what we can actually do is use Synon.js. It's like a mocking library for JavaScript, and here we want to test actually to-do component, which uses to-do service. So then, as you can see, I do a mock of it, and then I create, instantiate this component with the mocked service, and then I can actually do some assertion on if it was called in a proper way. So that's like the one way to do it. So then I actually call something on the component, and I want to know if the component called the service with the correct variables and everything. That's like one way to do it, which I actually am not a fan of that deep of that type of mocking. Then the second way is actually to do like small scale manual integration testing. So let's say I have this to-do component and he needs to do service, and I know it's easy to instantiate to do service, so I do it and then inject like real to-do service into the component and do this testing still without Angular, so it's much faster. And I don't have it here, but the third way would be it's actually easy to mock this service in the same way, so I don't have to require it and instantiate it, but I can create here some object with some function stubs which returns what I want and then inject it into control, like pass it into control into component. So that would be another way to do it if you want to really write inline some mock which does something. That's also possible. And then what's the place for the Karma and Jasmine? So they're actually pretty good at instantiating the whole AngularJS application. So for the real integration tests that the whole application is running and we really want to do some flows, or we want to test let's say like the backend calls or some infrastructure services, so like the central logging or interceptors, then of course it's the time and place to again use Karma and Jasmine and instantiate the whole application and try it like with this. So yeah, that was all. So what we went through, we looked at what is like the default way if you are checking on the internet, like of testing AngularJS application, like the old style. Then what is AngularJS context and how it relates to those original tests. Then like the new modules which came with the new version of JavaScript, how we can use them to implement like real unit tests for the AngularJS, and what is the place of Karma and Jasmine like right now when we are doing like this. So that was like everything, and now I would like to show you actually the example. I have a GitHub repository where you have like everything what I shown implemented. So let's open this firstly. So this is like what is in the repository is also running here, and it's like a really simple application with two roots, feature A and feature B. And feature A is really simple. It's just with the counter, and this is like feature A component, and this is how the test looks like. So this component has no dependencies, so I can just import it and then instantiate it and then do the tests. Of course, they are not running here because this is like a running version of this website. And then feature B is simple to-do application, so I have the to-dos, I can toggle them, I can add something new, I can remove done to-dos, and here there are also like some examples of the tests. So that's like for the service, really just get the service has no dependency, so I test it. Then for the component with the synonym, as you saw, and the integration test where you instantiate the service and the component. Now if I go back, actually there is more. I added later like a Karma integration test. So that's here actually. So that's like a standard way. So I really instantiate the module, then do the initial to-dos like I mock it, then I get the reference to the service and then I test it. So that's the standard way. And I can also show you, I think I have it here. So yeah, and then like this is all done with Webpack, and yeah, so if I want to just run the Mocha test, there's nothing to do with Webpack, I just run this and then and it's done. And of course, if you have like a really big portal or something and you have like hundreds or thousands of tests, then actually it makes some difference. And if you have like, if you want to run those tests quite often, then you can really save a lot of time. Or like, let's say there's like 10 developers on your project and they are all pushing changes into the central like repo, and there's like a continuous integration, and build takes 10 minutes and then you have to wait to see if you broke anything or not. So you want to take it like a minute or two, of course. So of course with the bigger projects it's makes a lot of sense from my point of view. So yeah, that was everything. So do you have any questions? Yes.
How will testing look like in Angular 2?
To be honest, I don't know yet. I suppose the thing is that they, of course, they are embracing the module syntax there. So there's like imports and exports again, like already. That means you can get access to your functionality just by importing it. Then again, it's the question if you can instantiate it without running Angular, because there are those annotations and then you specify like what is injected and so on. So I don't know. So basically, they are classes, and you can import those classes. And I suppose maybe you can provide those dependencies in your test, like in the constructor. So during instantiation, like you do new my class, and then you can pass them in yourself. So this should work. But then again, let's see. Like the API is a little bit shifting still. It's like alpha 46, I think now. Right now, the version of Angular 2. Actually started like to check it out 3 days ago, and then I already saw that most of the tutorials are outdated, so let's see.
There when you did the to-do service as ES6 module,
Yes.
could you also, and if you want to use the $HTTP service inside of it,
Yes.
how can you access Angular services inside of a
So
ES6 module service?
you import it like okay. So in the Angular 1.x, if you specify like this is a function, and then it was like empty function with no dependencies.
Yeah.
So you would specify there like $HTTP, and then in the second file you register it into Angular, and Angular knows, so it will provide it during runtime, but during test of course not. During test you have to provide it yourself, so you can create some HTTP mock and inject it there like explicitly in your test, which has those methods as stubs.
Okay.
This you can do.
So, but that also means that it only works in Angular itself when you use it in the Angular way. You couldn't just, and if you want to test it, then you actually have to mock the $HTTP
Yes.
service, but it doesn't work itself without mocking anything.
No.
Okay.
Of
makes
course.
sense,
But then again, also what is good to do, or what's usually done, is that you split like services which have logic, and then you do like some integration REST service which just has this REST calls and nothing else, and then you can mock it like this. But of course, like with the unit testing, it's like for the small units, and if you have something bigger, then of course you have to mock. It's also same in the Java. So if that's all, then thank you for your attention. And then yeah, there's like a GitHub repository, so you can check it.